welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different because I want to talk about how far HEMA has come in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I'm going to do that with an example from a fight at Swordfish 2010 between two people who I've never heard of and probably don't want me repeating their names too much. You're going to find out why here in a second. So coming up first on our gravy train of fun, we're going to have this first exchange, where we see both fighters exchange a flurry of blows with virtually no real regard for where they're hitting, why, or how. You're going to notice that they're using penties, which was an old sword that HEMA fighters used to use. It's kind of like nylon, sort of like a cutting board type material. It's plastic. And as you can see, it's very flexible. It warps a lot in the air. And as a result, it's almost impossible to tell things like edge alignment, contact, stuff like that. You're also going to notice that they're wearing almost no protection at all. Basically just gloves and a mask and what appears to be some leather gorgets. And what you're going to realize pretty quickly in here is that just because the swords are made of plastic doesn't mean that they have a reduced ability to hurt each other. We, of course, see this exchange cap out with an absolutely filthy late blow, which is going to be something of a running theme throughout this fight. The man walks up to try to apologize for what he's done, but the fencer on the left here doesn't appear to be having any of it. He does not appreciate the pat on the back that he received, so as you're going to see here, he gets his revenge. The ref says fight, and Black Fencer is still walking back to his corner, but White Fencer is kind enough here to allow him to saunter his way to the middle of the ring, where Black gets his revenge, so to speak, and White gets his comeuppance. There's another massive exchange of a flurry of blows, while Black backs White Fencer all the way up to the edge of the ring, and delivers his own set of filthy late blows. Coming up now, we see White Fencer start to adapt his strategy, given that Black Fencer has seemingly wanted nothing more than to charge him down, push him out of the ring, and beat the ever-loving crap out of him. White has decided that he is going to instead start throwing extremely fast, whippy one-handed strikes towards Black's legs in an attempt to prevent him from using them to charge him down. Unfortunately for White Fencer, this doesn't exactly work, as the penty is unable to deal significant enough damage to Black Fencer's legs to prevent him from charging him out of the ring yet again, and seemingly removing his mask with his hand, presumably so that he could beat the shit out of him even harder. White Fencer then does the gentlemanly thing and hands Black Fencer his sword back, presumably so that he can get his ass kicked a couple more times. And the judge and director here, seemingly unfazed by the display of brutality they just witnessed, goes right back to their positions and starts holding up flags like somehow there's some sort of points to be given out for what they just witnessed. So Black Fencer at this point is really going to have to refine his strategy if he wants to continue doing illegal strikes. And he does what I like to call the buffalo maneuver, where he charges in with a thrust, knowing that White will parry it out of the way, and rather than trying to deliver any kind of follow-up cut, simply gets into a clinch with White Fencer, at which point he attempts to throw him to the ground and presumably, again, pommel him to death with his sword. Unfortunately, the ref, who jumps in to try to break up the action, nearly gets kicked in the face by White and is able to put Black Fencer in a headlock long enough to still his berserker rage. And to cap it all off, as if this wasn't ridiculous enough, when the ref says fight again, people in the audience start clapping. This is apparently what they came here to see. Obviously, that's not something that we would like to see in tournaments nowadays, but back then, things were apparently very different. At this point, both fencers are now rethinking their strategy, simply going into the fight, flailing at one another, hitting wherever they can, however they can, waiting for the ref to call a halt, and both of them just trying to sneak in as many filthy late blows as they possibly can before somebody gets put in a headlock. It's at this point we come to the creme de la creme of the exchanges we've had so far, and Black, completely undeterred by the number of times he's had to be forcibly pulled off of his opponent, once again goes for the buffalo strategy here. He charges in and tries to get his opponent into a clinch, only to find that he has, at some point in this exchange, dropped his sword. Completely undeterred, Black Fencer decides to throw a weird little kick towards White's hip, in some sort of attempt to break up the action, only to realize yet again that he has made a grave mistake and that he has created distance between himself and an armed person. White obliges his mistake by swinging his sword at him with one hand as hard and as fast as he possibly can, to which Black attempts to take on the shoulder and walk away as though he didn't feel it, even though it's pretty clear that must have hurt. This exchange is scored clean hit red, and I honestly, no matter how many times I look at this, have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. You would think at this point that we'd be running out of exchanges, but we're not. Once again, Black charges in. Once again, White throws a whipping strike to Black's leg. It hits him square in the top of the thigh. Black is not at all deterred, goes for the clinch, and attempts to pommel White in the head with his sword. White, to his credit, puts up his left arm, defends himself with an overhook, and casually leans against Black Fencer, as I'm sure both of them are pretty tired at this point of whipping these light swords as hard as they possibly can into each other without anything actually happening. We come at last now to our final exchange. Black, losing a little bit of his steam now, comes forward with significantly less intent and is whipped in the arm by White as he comes into the action. Black throws the largest and most powerful arm cut I think he has ever done in his life, and it unfortunately misses as White was able to take a step backwards out of the action and prevent any follow-up hit. This is what I think the only clean exchange that actually happens in the entire fight. So with this final exchange, the judges throw up an indecisive amount of flags. The ref doesn't even declare who won, and honestly, I don't think anyone really cares. But the reason I'm talking about this fight is specifically because I want to call attention to the fact that it happened in 2010. There's a lot of people out there who will say things like, HEMA is dying, HEMA's getting worse, it's not martial anymore. And I honestly never understand where that kind of idea can come from, because the further back you go into the history of HEMA, the more you see stuff like this. This is Swordfish, remember, one of the biggest HEMA tournaments in the entire world running up until COVID. It had some of the biggest fighters that have ever fought. It had some of the biggest names, some of the best fights. And yet, in 2010, we see something that is akin to two children trying to beat each other up in the parking lot. People need to appreciate how far HEMA has come as a sport and as a martial art. And I think what this really digs down to at its deepest core is the fact that people seem to need to believe that sport and martiality are on these opposing sides of the scale. That somehow this fight, this brawl that happened was more martially valid simply because the two people were willing to hurt each other. Similarly, that modern sport fencing is worse because they weren't willing to hit each other. People will see someone get tapped on the hands and think, oh, well, that was nothing. I would have just walked through that and tried to beat you to death on the ground after I threw you there. Not realizing that strategy doesn't actually work regardless of whether or not you're in a real fight or a fake one. This whole idea of martial validity versus sportification is honestly just a really annoying topic that I'd rather not talk about at all, but I felt like this was a pretty good example of, at the very least, how martial validity and sportification can in a lot of ways grow together. I don't think anybody, regardless of whether you think HEMA is better now or worse now, will look at this fight and think that they want that back. So I would say that the reason it's not allowed anymore is entirely because of the sportification of the sport. So that's all. If you'd like to see more fights like this, feel free to send me some. I'm going to try to not do so many joke fights anymore. But all the same, I think it was a little bit enlightening. And if you'd like to see any more content like this, feel free to subscribe. And I hope to see you next time.